Hello everyone, welcome to this section. In this section, we're going to talk about functions in Python. So a function is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task. Functions can help us to organize our code, make it more readable, and reduce repetition. In Python, there are two types of functions: built-in functions that are predefined functions like print, len, input, that so far we've worked with many of them in the previous sections, and user-defined functions, functions that we create ourselves. This is the function that we are going to learn in this section. So how to define and call a function. A function is defined using def keyword followed by the name of the function and parentheses. Here, I want to show how to create a function. We use the def keyword and we name the function. For example, this function name is greet, and then the parentheses. In the parentheses, we will learn later in this section that we can pass some arguments to these parentheses later on in this section. But for now, we just know that we need to put parentheses. Then a colon. After that, we are having this print function here. So this is the built-in function, and this is the user-defined function. And this function is going to print hello world message for us in the terminal. So when I want to call this function, I simply just type down the name of the function followed by parentheses, and then this function is called and this function is executed. So when I run this code, you should see hello world message in the output. So now it's compiling because it's for the first time. It may take a bit of time. Okay, now we're having hello world in the output. We saw that we only had this function call here one time, and one time this function executed, and this function is simply typing down hello world. So if I call this function more than once, this function is going to be executed. Oh, sorry, greet. So when I call this function twice, this function is being called twice, therefore this part is executed twice. So whenever we call the function, the compiler goes up here, starts with the first line of the function, and this function is only have a single line, so it is going to print hello world. So we saw that how we can create a function and how we can call a function. And there are three parts for function to remember: the def keyword, the name of the function, and parentheses. And later on, we'll learn about some arguments that we may want to include in the parentheses. So here we could, instead of calling this function, I could type down print hello world. And if I wanted to have it twice, I could type it down twice. Okay? And then run the code. It was going to do the same thing. However, we are using the function to avoid repetition. Now I'm repeating this line twice. Instead, I'm having this code being executed here once and avoiding the repetition. Okay, and it is increasing the readability. So this is why we use functions. And this is just a very tiny example here. For example, we want a function to do some mathematical operations for us. Whenever we call the function, that function is going to execute a certain block of codes to do the mathematical operations for us. And calling a function is much easier, like twice, three times, four times. If you want to call a function four times, it's much easier to repeat all those mathematical operations in the code four times. So it increases the readability of the code as well. So in this section, we're going to focus on functions, and we're going to have more examples of functions later on in this section. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to talk about parameters and arguments. Functions can take parameters to make them more flexible. So a parameter is a placeholder inside the parentheses in the function definition. When calling the function, we provide arguments which are actual values. Let me illustrate it with an example here. So I'm using the def keyword. The name of the function is greet, and then inside the parentheses, I'm having one argument or a parameter, let's say. Okay, so this parameter is called name. This function, when it is called, it is going to execute this line of code. It is going to print hello message followed by the name that is passed to this function as an argument. Okay, so this function is going to type down hello message and then type down the name. But what is this name? So when in the main part I'm calling this function, in the parentheses I'm passing Alice. Okay, and this Alice, when the greet function is called, this Alice is going to be passed to the greet function as an argument. And here in the greet function, Alice is stored in the name parameter. And here when I'm printing the hello and then putting the name there, here it is going to print out Alice. So when I run this code, here I'm having hello Alice. So hello is the default message of this function. And whenever I'm calling this function, I'm passing one name. And this name is going to be executed and placed here after hello. Okay. And then I'm calling the function one more time. And this time I'm passing Bob as the argument. So when I pass the Bob here, the greet function is going to be executed and Bob is going to place in the name parameter, and the name parameter now holds the Bob value, Bob string, and then it is going to print the message hello and then the Bob here. So we saw that how we can call a function with an argument. But in this case, because this function is having an argument in the parentheses, can I just call the function without any arguments? So let us run. It should be, the answer should be no. So when I run, I'm having an error here. In the previous video example, we saw that there was no error. But why we are having an error here when I'm calling the function with empty parentheses? The reason is that in the definition of the function, we are having the name parameter declared here. So whenever we are calling this function, we are obliged to pass an argument here. Okay, and that argument is going to be printed out in the output of this function. So this function requires to have one argument to be called, and we are passing no argument here. This is why there is an error. But if I have a message here when I'm calling the function, I'm having the Reza Shahin, a string to be passed as an argument for the greet function. Reza Shahin is going to be placed for the name, and then it is going to print hello, and instead of name, because now I'm calling the function with this string, it is going to say hello Reza Shahin. You see here? So this was a coding exercise of how to declare a function, how to call a function, and also how to use parameters or arguments when calling a function. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about a scope of variables. So each variable has a scope. They are either local or global. In this video, we are going to talk about local variables. So variables that are declared inside a function are local variables, and they can be only accessed within that function. Let me illustrate it with an example. I'm having a function called greet, and I'm using the def keyword, and there is no argument for this function. So when I call this function, a local variable is initialized to be equal to hello world string, and then it is going to print this variable for me, which is called message. Okay, so I'm having the greet function being called here. So when I run, I see that I'm calling the greet function. The compiler goes up here, initialize the message variable, and then it prints the message variable. So we see the message variable in the output hello world. Okay, but can I access this message variable? So can I print it directly here? So when I run, I see an error. Why? This error comes from the fact that this message variable is a local variable for the greet function and it's not a global variable, so it would be accessible outside of this function. So this message variable, because it is declared and initialized in our greet function, it is only accessible inside the function. And when I want to use that message variable outside of the function, it returns an error. And how do we know that it's inside the function? Because when we are declaring a function, we start from the beginning of the left side of the note here when I'm typing down, but when I have the colon and when I enter, I start typing something, for example, here, it does not start from the beginning of the left hand side. Okay, it starts with some space. This means that this part of the code that has some space from the left hand side is included in this function that has a colon sign above here. But because here again I'm having the start point as the left side of the page, we see that it's in the global part, it's in the main part of the code. But because here, let me illustrate it with another example. Greeting function, then colon, print hello from the greeting function. Okay, and when I come here and I call this greeting function, let me run the code. It says hello from the greeting function. It is being printed out here. Why? Because this part is a part of this greeting function. How? Because we see that there is a space there. So this is a part of the above line. Okay, but here that I'm calling this greeting function, there is no space from the left side, so it's not a part of the greeting function but an independent part. So in this video we learned how local variable works in Python, and we learned that they are only accessible within a function that they are declared and initialized and not outside of the function. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the previous video we talked about local variables. In today's video we're going to talk about global variables. So global variables are declared outside of functions. So they are global and they are accessible from any functions. To illustrate it with an example, here I'm having a variable called message and it is having a string that the string is hello world. So it's a global variable because it is outside of any function, and this is the only function that I have here. The name of my function is function1. I use the def keyword, and basically this function is going to print this message variable that is defined outside of this function. So this function can access a global variable that is defined and that is declared and initialized outside of this function. This is how nice the global variables are. So I call the function1 here and I expect to have the output message in the output because this function is going to print the message variable and this message variable is saying hello world. Therefore, when I call this function, I expect to see the message hello world in the output. Also, I can have another print function here that is printing out the message function in outside of any function. So it is also globally trying to access a global variable. So when I run this code, I see two hello world message being printed out in the terminal. So in this lesson, we learned how to declare and initialize a global variable, and we learned that we can access a global variable inside a function even though that variable is declared and initialized outside of that specific function. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we are going to have a coding exercise that have local and global variables together in one example. So if a local variable has the same name as a global variable, the function will use the local variable. For example, I'm having a global variable called number and it is equal to 10. Then I'm having a function called modify number and I'm using the def keyword. In this function, basically, I am initializing a variable called number and it is equal to 5. Then it is going to print this variable number for me in the output. So I call in the main part, I call this modify number function. So it is declaring and initializing a local variable called number, and it is going to print its value, which is 5. And then I'm printing out the outside function, and then I'm trying to print the global variable number. So when I run this code, I see that inside function equals 5. So we see it here, inside function, the number variable equals 5. The outside function, the number variable equals 10. And the reason is why in this function now we are not accessing the variable number which is global. The reason is that we didn't declare global number and then start modifying, for example, number equals, for example, 10. This is why when we are not typing down this line of code, when we are typing down only the declaration of a variable like number which has the same name as the global variable, it is going to consider it as a local variable. However, if I comment this part and I have this part right here and this part right here, I'm using this line for the declaration of the global variable inside my function, and then I'm having this global variable equals to 20. So now the global variable has been modified to 20. So when I run this code, I see inside function the variable is 20 and outside function the variable is also 20. So this is very important to use the global number uh, creation and declaration of the global variable inside a function if we want to use this global variable inside of the function. Otherwise, if we just type down the declaration without the global keyword, it is going to consider that you're declaring a new variable, a new local variable inside of this function. So this is why when I'm having only the declaration equals to 5 and then printing out the number variable, it is printing 5 for me in the inside of the function, but outside of the function when I'm printing the number variable, it is accessing this global variable. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to write a program that declares a function that takes a number as a parameter and prints whether it's an even number or odd. So here is my function. I'm using the def keyword to declare my function, and I'm having the name of the function called check even odd, and I'm having one argument for this function that we call it number. It could be x, it could be y. We can get to choose this number, okay? And this function is basically checking to see a number if it's even or odd. In order to understand if a number is even, we need to do a division. So when this is a definition of an even number. When a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division equals 0, it means that that number is even. Otherwise, that number is odd. So let me write it down for you. If a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division equals 0, it means that number is an even number. Otherwise, it is an odd number. So this is a definition of an even number. So if a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division equals 0, it means that number is even. And if a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of that division does not equal 0, that number is an odd number. Okay, so for example, when 10 is divided by 2, the output of this division is 5, but the remainder of this division is 0. So we understand that 10 is an even number. But when 11 is divided by 2, the remainder of this division does not equal to 0, is not equal to 0. This is why 11 is an odd number. So now we want to define a function that checks whether a number is even or odd. To do that, we are having one if-else condition here. So the number that is passed to this function, we are having this operation on that number. So this number is divided by 2. And we are checking to see if that number that is passed as an argument to this function, it is divided by 2. And it's the remainder of this division equals 0. We are checking the if condition. If this happens, print even. Otherwise, print odd. So it checks to see if a number is passed to this function. That number is divided by 2. Its remainder equal to 0. If this statement is true, then this part is true. Then it is going to enter this if condition and it is going to print even. Otherwise, it is going to print odd for us. Let me illustrate it with an example. So I call this check even odd function, and I'm passing number 10 as the argument. And I'm calling this function one more time, and I'm calling the function, I'm passing the argument that is 7. So let me run the code. So when I run the code for the number 10, I see even in the output. When I have the number 7, I see odd in the output. So one thing to remember is that I'm using the modular sign here. So the modular sign is going to return the remainder of a division. So this number is divided by this number. When I'm using this modular sign, it means that if this number is divided by this number, print me the remainder. Okay, give me the remainder. So when I'm having, let me illustrate it with an example. So when I have 10 divided by 2 here, when I run this code, you see number 5 in the output, okay? 10 divided by 2. But when I have print 10 modulo 2 and run this code, we have the output 0. What does it mean? It means that if 10 is divided by 2, the remainder of that division is what number? This is 0. Okay, so this is how the modulo sign is going to help us to understand the remainder of a division. It was a very good example. And now we see that here I'm having this block of code being executed whenever we call this function. Just imagine that we were not using the function. So I'm calling the function 2 times using 2 lines. Okay. And this part of the code is written only once. So if I wanted to not have a function, and every time that I was checking a number to see if it's odd or even, I had to write these 4 lines. So whenever, for example, I want to check 10 numbers, each time I had to write 4 lines of code. So 10 numbers multiplied by 4. So 40 lines to check 10 numbers if they are odd or even. However, here I'm having only 4 lines being written only once. And when I'm calling that function, I'm just using 1 line to call this function to do the mathematical work for me. So if I want to call this function 10 times, it will take 10 lines plus these 4 lines that are written only once. It will be 14 lines of code. However, if I want to this mathematical operations, these 4 lines for 10 numbers to be checked, the result will be 40 lines of code. And this is just a simple example. So it is very useful to use functions to reduce the repetition in our code and therefore increase the readability. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program that declares a function that takes three numbers as parameters and returns the largest number. I'm declaring my function using the def keyword. The name of my function is find underscore max, and it is taking three arguments, a, b, and c, and they're separated by commas. And basically, this function is going to return the maximum number among these three numbers. So this is a user-defined function. The user-defined function in this example is find max because we are defining this function, okay? But we are having one built-in function as well. If you remember, we discussed this in the introduction. For example, the print function is a built-in function. So the Python itself give us this permission to use the print function to simply print and do no further works, okay? And this max function also is one of the built-in functions. So when I'm having this max function here, whatever that I'm putting in the parentheses, it is going to calculate the maximum among the numbers, and it is going to return me the maximum number among those numbers. So this function, whenever it's called, it is taking three arguments. It is going to call this built-in max function to find which one is the largest number and then return the largest number for me, okay? Now I'm having a variable called largest. It is equal to this line. Basically, this line is going to find max. It is going to call the find max function, and these are the three arguments: 10, 20, and 15. So these three variables are used here as a, b, and c respectively. So 20 is b, c equals 15, and a equals 10. And then this function basically is going to call the built-in function and find the largest number, which is 20, and return that number. And that output of that function is going to be assigned to this variable largest because there is an equal sign here. And it is going to basically print the largest variable, which we expect to have the output 20. As you see here, we are having 20. Here again, I could have, for example, largest 2, and I'm calling the find max function. I'm having, for example, 100, 2, and 35, for example, and then I'm printing largest 2 variable. So when I run this code, I see 100 is the largest number, and indeed it is a true output for us. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about functions with default values. So we can assign default values to parameters of a function. So if no argument is provided, the default value is used. Here I'm having a function called greet. I'm declaring it using the def keyword, and I'm having a parameter here, but this is a bit different from what we saw so far. Previously, we were having a function, for example, called def hello, and it was having the name and it was printing in the output for us the hello message and then, and then the name. Okay, this is what we saw so far. So when I call this hello function, let me comment these two lines. So when I call this hello function and I'm having an argument here, so when I call it, it says hello Reza, okay? And when I call this function with no argument, there is an error here. And we saw that that this error will comes up will come up when we are having an argument in the parentheses for the function when we are declaring it, okay? So in order to avoid this error, we are going to have functions with default values. So here I'm having a function called greet with default values. So it has the name again, it has the same argument. It is having one argument in the parentheses, and it has this part that is extra. What is this part is going to do is the following. Name equals friend. And this function, when it is called, it is going to print hello and then print out the name that is used when calling this function. However, we can call this function with an argument and without an argument. So when I call this function with an argument, it is going to say, for example, hello Reza. But when I call this function without any argument, it is going to say hello friend. This is a function with default parameters or default values. So when I call this function now, so let me comment this part. So when I call the greet function and I'm having Charlie here as the argument being passed to this function, and when I run this code, it is going to say hello Charlie, okay? But here when I call this function and I put nothing in the parentheses, if I call the hello function with empty parentheses, we saw that there will be an error. Why? Because it requires an argument. But when I call this function greet, it requires an argument indeed as well. But when I call it with empty parentheses, it is going to by default set this friend string equal to name and assign it to the name, and then consider that name in the output. Whenever I call this function with no argument, it is going to use this default value. This is why we call them functions with default parameters or default values. So let me run the code. Now I'm calling this function and I'm passing no argument. It says hello friend. In the next line, I'm calling the function and passing an argument. It says hello Charlie. Okay, so let me review it one more time. Functions with default values are like this. When we are calling the function with an argument, it is going to place the argument here. So when I call the function with the Charlie argument, Charlie string, it is going to set Charlie to name, and then in the output says hello Charlie, as we see in the code here. But when we have the greet function being called with empty parentheses, it is going to by default use the friend keyword here and put it equal to name and print hello friend in the output. Okay, so this is how a function with default value would work. We learned that this is not possible in normal functions, because in normal functions, when I have this hello function and it has no default value, I must have an argument when I'm calling this function. Otherwise, if I call this function with empty parentheses, it is going to return an error for me. And how we can understand that a function is a normal function or it's a function with default values? It's a good question if you're having it. This is the answer. So this part shows us, okay, this is a function with default value. This is a sign for us to understand. When we see this equal and certain value equals to, for example, the argument of the function, we should understand, okay, this is a function with default value. So when I call this function with my own argument, it is going to use my argument. But when I call this function with no argument, it is going to use a default value itself for that function. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to have a coding exercise with functions with multiple return values. So functions in Python can return multiple values. Here is an example. I'm using the def keyword to declare my function, and I'm having a function called get sum and product. And in parentheses, it takes two arguments. And this function, whenever it is called, is going to declare a new variable called sum, and sum equals a plus b, so it is going to have the result of a plus b stored in sum. Then it has a new variable called product, and it is storing the result of a multiplied by b. This sum could be x and this product could be y, but we are just naming them like that so it increases the readability of the code. So after that, it is going to return the value of sum, this variable that is calculating a plus b, and product, which is this variable that is calculating the multiplication of a and b. Okay? And whenever I want to call this function, as before, I'm having the get sum and product name, so the name of the function, and then in parentheses, I'm having two numbers because it takes two numbers in parentheses as the argument. So 3 and 4. I'm calling this function with 3 and 4. However, because this function is returning two values in the output, this line of code, this call of the function equals two variables on the left side. So the first one is the result of the sum and the second one is the result of product. And because this get sum and product function is returning first the value of sum and then the value of product, I'm having the first left hand side variable here result of sum because the first return value is going to be stored in the first variable on the left hand side here, and then the product, which is the second returned value, is going to be stored in the second declared variable in the left hand side. Okay, so this is the point of having a function with multiple return values. It is going to return two values, sum and product, and therefore when I'm calling this function, it equals two variables on the left hand side, one for sum, one for product. And if it is returning sum first, be aware that it is going to store sum in the first variable declared on the left hand side, and the same logic goes for the product. Okay, then I'm printing the result. So I'm saying that print and the message sum, result underscore sum, which is the first variable, and then print the message product and then a result product variable, which is the second variable. So when I run this code, we see this sum message is shown here and it says the result sum equals 7 and the product is shown here and the result product equals 12, which are the correct numbers 7 and 12. So this is a very good example of having a function with multiple values, multiple return values. Why? Because maybe we would like to have a function that does different types of mathematical operations for us. We can combine all these mathematical operations in a single function and not even 2, 3, or 4 functions. So it is very useful to combine them and ask the function to return multiple values for us after doing the calculation, and then we are assigning them to different variables. As we see, we are trying to learn how to optimize our code as we proceed through the course, because it's very useful to have an optimized code, a code that is having high level of readability. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about return statement in functions. So functions can return a value using the return statement. The value returned can be stored in a variable for further use. Let me illustrate it with an example. So here I'm having a function called add. To declare this add function, I'm using the def keyword, and in parentheses, I'm having two parameters or arguments. They are separated by a comma. the first one and the second one. The first one is called A and the second one is called B. Whenever we call this function is going to return A plus B. Okay, so this function is going to add the first number and the second number that are passed to this function by doing this line, return A plus B. So let me show you how I'm calling this function. Now when I call this function, I'm having a variable called result, and this result variable equals the result of this function, the output of this function equals this result variable. So I'm calling the add function, so I'm typing down the name of the function, then in parentheses I'm having two numbers and they are separated by a comma, 3 and 5. So 3 is going to be equal to A because this is the first parameter or argument that is passed to this function, and 5 is going to be set to B because this is the second argument that is passed to this function, and B also is the second argument. So I'm calling the add function and I'm passing 3 and 5. And when I'm calling this function is going to return a value for me. It is going to return the value A plus B for me. And A plus B equals 8. So the output of this function is going to be assigned to my result variable here. So 8 is going to be stored in the result, and now I'm printing out the result. So when I have the output, when I run the code, I see that when I'm printing the value of result, I see 8 in the output. I can have, for example, a new variable called x equals add, and then I'm having 2 and 2. I can have y add 5 and 6, for example. I could have z equal add, for example, x and y. And in the output, I would like to have the result of x, then x, print the result of y, then print y, and then finally I want to show the result of z and have the z here. So what I'm doing here is that, again, like the result variable, I'm declaring three new variables, x, y, and z. I'm calling the add function, asking the function add to perform the a plus b with two numbers, 2 and 2. So when I call this add function, the first 2 is placed for the a, the second 2 is placed for the b, and a plus b is going to be returned when I'm having this line, and the result of the return, the output of the function is going to be stored in x. So I expect the value of x will be 4. Then I'm calling the function another time and assigning the result to variable y. And when I'm calling the function, I'm having 5 and 6. So 5 is A and 6 is B. 5 plus 6, the result is 11. So I expect to have the 11 for the y. So 11 is the output of this function, and this is going to be assigned to variable y. And then I'm calling the function one more time, this time with the variable x and variable y, and they are previously taken two values. So I expect the result will be 15 because x is 4 and y is 11. So x is now placed for the a and y equals b. So 4 plus 11 equals 15. So when I run this code, I see the result of x. So here also I'm printing out the output of x, y, and z. The result of x equals 4, which we expected. The result of y equals 11, which we expected. And the result of z equals 15, which we expected. So this is how we can have a return statement in a function to give us some output of the function, and we store that output in, for example, certain variables for further use here. And also we learned how functions can be useful, because now I'm performing this line of code a plus b one time only, but I'm using it 4 times in my code. Instead of typing down these mathematical operations 4 times, I'm just calling it with different parameters. So it is much easier to have a function to do the job for us, and we have different part of the code where we call the function to do that job for us. So we don't have any repetition. We are having the mathematical operations being written only once. This is how it can reduce the amount of code that you're going to write, and this is how it is going to improve the readability of your code, because you're typing down the operations one time, but when we are going to have like 10 times of this operation, instead of having it 10 times being repeated in the code, and it would be not very easy to read, it would be hard to follow. Okay, another time I'm having for example, a plus b, another time I'm having 2 plus 2, 5 plus 6, x plus y, etc. Instead of having these, I'm just calling the function, and the code is being reused several times, and it is being written one time only. So this is how useful the functions are in Python. In the next videos, we're going to dive deeper into this concept. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to write a program that declares a function, and this function takes a temperature in Celsius as a parameter and returns the equivalent temperature in Fahrenheit. Here is my function. So I'm using the def keyword to declare my function. This is the name of my function, called Celsius to Fahrenheit. And in the parentheses, it is taking one parameter or argument, and I just name it Celsius. We can call it X, we can call it Y, whatever we want. And this function is going to return the value of this statement. This statement is the following: Celsius times 9 divided by 5 in parentheses plus 32. So this is the very famous formula, and we know it from before, that is going to take a Celsius degree and convert it to Fahrenheit. So this is the formula to do that. For example, this Celsius could be, for example, 30, and I want to know 30 degrees in Celsius is what is the temperature of equivalent of 30 degrees in Celsius in Fahrenheit. So this is the Celsius value, so 30 for example, and then using this formula we can get the output of the Fahrenheit temperature. Now to do the job for me, I'm having a variable called temp. I call it x for the sake of simplicity. So I'm having a variable x, and we are calling this Celsius to Fahrenheit function. We're calling this function using the argument 25. What does this 25 mean? This means that I'm having 25 degrees in Celsius, and I want to know its equivalent in Fahrenheit. And it is going to call this function with 25 equals Celsius. So 25 is multiplied by 9 divided by 5 in the parentheses, and then plus 32. The output is going to be returned. So when I call this function, this is doing this part for me and return its value. So, and the return value is assigned to X variable. Okay, we are assigning it to X variable. And finally, I'm printing out the X variable. So when I run the code, I see the equivalent of 25 degrees in Celsius is 77 degrees in Fahrenheit. We could try like 18 degrees in Celsius and find its equivalent in Fahrenheit. And we see its equivalent in Fahrenheit is 64.4. So this is how we can take a number and do some mathematical operations on that number and return the output. In particular, in this example, we learned how to get a number as the degree in Celsius and do certain mathematical operations to convert the Celsius number to the Fahrenheit number and return the output. And the returned output is stored in variable x, and then we are printing out the x variable. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program that declares a function that takes two numbers as parameters and print their sum. I'm declaring the function called addNumbers, and I'm using the def keyword, and in parentheses I'm having two parameters, a and b. And whenever this function is called, it is going to print the value a plus b for me. To call this function, I'm typing down the name of the function, and then I'm typing down two numbers, so 3 and 7. When I call this function, 3 is placed for A and 7 is placed for B, and A plus B means 3 plus 7, and it is going to print the value of 10 for me because it is 3 plus 7. So when I run this code, I see the output 10. I'm having another, for example here for you. I'm having add numbers, meaning that I'm typing down the name of the function. I'm passing two numbers, 10 and 20. I run this code, the output is 30. And let me define another function here, exactly like this. So when I'm having add my numbers and I'm having a and b as the argument, oops, sorry, a and b, I'm having the colon. It is going to return a plus b for me. Okay, so when I call this add my numbers function with two values like 100 and 200, so if I run this code, I see the output is 300. So we see here that I'm having another function called add my numbers. The first one was add numbers, and this is a new function that I defined, add my numbers. And in the parentheses, we are having a and b. And this function is going to use a return statement, a plus b. So whenever I call this function is going to return a plus b, and automatically we see the output in the terminal. So this was an example of how to declare a function that does, for example, the sum of two numbers for us. We could either use the print function so that function is going to print the output, or we could use the return statement to have the output of the function. Here I'm printing the output using the print function a plus b. We see 10 and 30 is printed in the output. Here I'm not using the print function, but I'm using the return function, and it is going to return the value a and b, a plus b. So whenever this function is called, this value is going to be returned, and we see the output in the terminal. This was a very good example of how to call a function and how to have a function with print or a return statement to do the job for us. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to learn about how to modify a global variable inside a function. I'm having a global variable called count, and it is equal to 0. Then I'm having a function called increment count, and I'm using the def keyword to declare this function and empty parentheses, so it accepts no argument for this function, then colon. Then in this function, I am declaring the global variable. In order to modify a global variable, for example, in this case, the count variable, I must use the global keyword before declaring this count global variable inside this function. So if you want to modify a global variable, you must use the global keyword and then the name of that global variable that you're intending to modify. So I'm typing down global keyword and then count, meaning that I would like to modify the count variable, which is a global variable. And after that, I, for example, type down count equals 1. So now I modified my global variable. This is what is going to happen in my increment count function. And then I'm calling this increment count function in here. So I'm calling the function. So I expect when this function is called, the global variable count is first declared and then modified. And finally, in my code, I am using the print function to print this global variable here. So when I run this code, I see the output is 1. Previously, when we initialized the count variable, it was equal to 0, but now it shows the value equal to 1. How it worked? It worked using this function. So this function helped us to modify a global variable. To review, in order to modify a global variable, we must use the global keyword and then the name of the variable that we are intending to modify. After that, we type down the name of the variable and then assign it a new number. For example, here I assign number 10. So when I run, this function is being called using this line, and then the modified count variable is printed out in the output. So we see number 10 in the output. So if I put number 1, it is going to make it to be number 1. If I put number 2 here, it is going to print number 2 in the output for us. It depends how we modify and what number we set for this global variable. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we would like to write a program that define a function called calculate, which takes two numbers and return their sum, difference, and products. So it is going to have multiple return values. To do that, I'm having the calculate function being declared here using the def keyword, and it accepts two arguments, a and b. Basically, this function is going to return three values. Each value is separated by a comma. So the first return value is a plus b, the second return value is a minus b, and the third return value is a multiplied by b. Then when I'm calling this function here, I'm calling the calculate function and I'm passing two arguments, 7 and 3. A equals 7 and b equals 3. Why? Because a is the first argument in this function and I'm passing 7 as the first argument, so a equals 7. With the same logic, b equals 3. Then this calculate equals three variables on the left hand side. One variable is called sum, the other one is difference, and the other variable is called product. So a plus b, the return value of this first return value in this function is going to be assigned to the first variable on the left hand side here. So a plus b is going to be assigned to sum. A minus b is going to be assigned to the second variable called difference, and the third return value, a multiplied by b, is going to be assigned to the third variable on the left hand side, which is called product. Then I'm printing out the sum, the difference, and the product. So when I run this code, I have the sum equals to 10, which is true because 7 plus 3 equals 10. I have the difference equals to 4, and the product equals to 21. So in this coding exercise, we reviewed a function with multiple return values, and we saw that we can have one line to do all the mathematical operations in one function. And then when we are calling this function, on the right hand side, we type down the call of the function, and on the left hand side, I'm typing down three variables because this function is returning three values. Thank you for watching.